In the shadows of ancient Rome, where cobblestones echoed with the footsteps of emperors and slaves alike, there existed a world far more intricate than the tales we tell today. The gladiators who fought beneath the Roman sun were not merely the muscle-bound heroes of our imagination, nor were they simply doomed souls marching toward inevitable death. They were men and women caught in the complex web of Roman society where honor and shame, freedom and slavery, life and death intertwined in ways that would seem foreign to our modern eyes. The great Colosseum, standing like a stone giant in the heart of the empire, was not just an arena of blood and sand. It was a mirror reflecting the soul of Rome itself, where politics played out in spectacle, where social order was both reinforced and challenged, and where the roar of 50,000 voices could make or break an emperor's reign. To understand what gladiators in their arena were truly like, we must journey beyond the myths and into the dusty streets of ancient Rome, where reality was far more fascinating than any fiction we could devise. Long before Rome ruled the Mediterranean, in the misty hills of Etruria, ancient peoples honored their dead with ritual combat. When a great warrior or nobleman passed into the shadows, his spirit required blood to ease its journey to the underworld. Captive enemies would fight to the death beside the funeral pyre, their lives offered as gifts to the deceased. This was not entertainment, but sacred duty, a bridge between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. The Romans, ever practical in their borrowing of customs, adopted this Etruscan tradition, but transformed it into something uniquely their own. What began as private funeral rites gradually evolved into public displays of wealth and power. Roman nobles discovered that sponsoring gladiatorial games could win them political favor and popular acclaim. The munera, as these games were called, became tools of ambition as much as acts of reverence. By the time of the Republic, gladiatorial combat had woven itself into the fabric of Roman political life. Ambitious politicians would bankrupt themselves organizing ever more elaborate games, knowing that the cheers of the crowd today might translate into votes tomorrow. The arena became a stage where power was displayed, loyalty was tested, and the complex relationships between ruler and ruled played out in the most dramatic way possible. When Emperor Vespasian ordered the construction of what we now call the Colosseum in 72 AD, he was not merely building an arena. He was creating a monument to imperial power, a gift to the Roman people that would forever link the Flavian dynasty with the greatest spectacles the world had ever seen. Rising from the drained lake of Nero's hated Golden House, this massive structure would demonstrate that the new emperor served the people rather than indulging only himself. The building that emerged from nearly a decade of construction was a marvel that would have impressed even modern engineers. 4 stories of travertine limestone and tuff stone rose 157 feet into the Roman sky, creating an elliptical amphitheater that could hold between 50,000 and 80,000 spectators. But the true genius lay not in its size, but in its systems. Beneath the arena floor stretched a labyrinth of tunnels, chambers, and mechanical devices known as the hypodium. Here, elaborate elevator systems could lift wild animals, scenery, and even entire landscapes into the arena above, creating transformations that must have seemed magical to the watching crowds. The seating itself told the story of Roman society in stone and marble. Closest to the action sat the emperor and the senatorial class on cushioned marble seats. Above them, the equestrian order enjoyed their designated section, while ordinary citizens filled the higher tiers. At the very top, women and slaves watched from wooden benches, their distance from the arena reflecting their distance from power. Even in entertainment, Rome's rigid social hierarchy was carefully maintained and publicly displayed. The men who stepped onto the sand of the arena came from all corners of the empire and all levels of society, though few came by choice. Most were slaves, captured in Rome's endless wars and condemned to fight for the amusement of their conquerors. Prisoners of war from Germania, Gaul, Britannia, and the far reaches of Africa found themselves bound for the gladiator schools, where they would learn the arts of combat or die in the attempt. Yet the ranks of gladiators also included free men who had fallen on desperate times. Debt, disgrace, or simple hunger might drive a Roman citizen to sign the gladiator's oath, trading his freedom for food, shelter, and the slim chance of glory. These volunteers, known as octorati, bound themselves to their owners for a fixed period, becoming slaves in all but name. Most shocking to Roman sensibilities were the occasional members of the upper classes who chose the arena, whether from a taste for adventure or a desire to escape the constraints of their social position. The gladiator schools, or ludi, were part prison, part military camp, and part athletic academy. Here, under the watchful eyes of trainers called doctores, new recruits learned not just to fight, but to die with dignity. The training was brutal and systematic. Each gladiator specialized in a particular fighting style, with specific weapons and armor that would define his identity in the arena. The retiarius fought with net and trident, quick and lightly armored. The secutor, his traditional opponent, carried sword and shield behind a smooth helmet designed to prevent the net from catching. The myrmeo bore the distinctive fish-crested helmet, while the thraex fought in the Thracian style with curved sword and small shield. When the gates of the Colosseum opened for a day of games, the spectacles that unfolded followed a carefully choreographed program designed to build excitement throughout the day. The morning began with the venaciones, elaborate hunts where trained fighters called bestiarii faced exotic animals from across the empire. Lions from Africa, bears from Germania, and elephants from distant lands provided both spectacle and a demonstration of Rome's global reach. Midday brought the most somber portion of the program, when condemned criminals faced execution in the arena. These noxii, as they were called, might be thrown to wild beasts, crucified, or forced to reenact mythological scenes that ended in death. This was not sport, but justice, a public demonstration of the fate that awaited those who defied Roman law. The afternoon belonged to the gladiators, and it was for these fights that the crowd had truly come. Contrary to popular belief, most gladiatorial combats did not end in death. These men were valuable investments, expensive to train and maintain. A gladiator who survived his first few fights might develop a following, earn prize money, and even achieve a form of celebrity. Death rates in the arena, while certainly higher than in most occupations, were probably closer to those of modern boxing than the massacre often portrayed in films. The famous gesture of thumbs up or down, supposedly determining a fallen gladiator's fate, may be largely mythical. Ancient sources describe various hand signals used by the crowd and emperor, but their exact meaning remains unclear. What is certain is that the decision to spare or kill a defeated gladiator involved complex considerations of performance, cost, and public sentiment. Behind the spectacle of the arena lay a sophisticated business enterprise that generated enormous wealth for some and provided livelihoods for thousands more. Gladiator schools were commercial ventures, owned by wealthy Romans who invested heavily in training and maintaining their fighters. These lanistae, as they were called, operated much like modern sports team owners, buying promising recruits, developing their skills, and renting them out for games throughout the empire. The economics of gladiatorial games were staggering. A single day of elaborate spectacles could cost a sponsor the equivalent of millions of modern dollars. Exotic animals had to be captured across the empire and transported to Rome. Gladiators required years of training, specialized equipment, medical care, and substantial food rations. The arena itself needed constant maintenance, and the complex machinery of the hypodrome required teams of skilled operators. Yet the potential returns were equally impressive. Successful gladiators could earn prize money, gifts from admiring fans, and even freedom if they survived long enough. Some retired gladiators became trainers or even opened their own schools. A few achieved such fame that their names were remembered long after their deaths, their images appearing on oil lamps, mosaics, and graffiti throughout the empire. The games also supported entire industries. Vendors sold food and drink to the crowds. Betting was widespread and probably organized, with odds makers calculating the chances of different fighters. Souvenir sellers offered miniature weapons, gladiator figurines, and other mementos. The spectacles of the arena were as much economic engine as entertainment. While male gladiators dominated the arena, they were not its only performers. Female gladiators, known as gladiatrices, occasionally appeared in the games, though their participation was controversial and relatively rare. These women, often drawn from the same sources as their male counterparts, fought with the same weapons and faced the same dangers. Their presence in the arena challenged traditional Roman views of gender and propriety, leading eventually to their prohibition under later emperors. The animal hunts that opened each day's program were spectacles in their own right, requiring enormous resources and careful planning. Rome's appetite for exotic beasts was insatiable, and the empire's expansion provided access to creatures that few Romans had ever imagined. Elephants from Africa, tigers from India, and bears from the northern forests all found their way to the Colosseum's underground chambers. The logistics of capturing, transporting, and maintaining these animals represented one of the greatest organizational challenges of the ancient world. Some of the most elaborate spectacles involved flooding the arena for naval battles, or naumachii. These mock sea battles, featuring real ships and hundreds of participants, demonstrated Roman engineering prowess while recreating famous historical conflicts. The sight of ships maneuvering in the flooded Colosseum, complete with boarding actions and sea battles, must have been breathtaking for audiences who had never seen the ocean. Away from the roar of the crowds, gladiators lived lives of strange contradictions. They were slaves who might dine better than free citizens, prisoners who could become celebrities, and warriors who spent more time in training than in actual combat. The gladiator schools provided substantial meals rich in protein, ensuring that their valuable investments maintained the muscle mass necessary for effective fighting. Archaeological evidence suggests that gladiators ate better than most Romans, with regular portions of meat, vegetables, and the energy-rich barley that gave them one of their nicknames, hordeari, or barley men. Medical care in the gladiator schools was remarkably advanced for its time. School physicians, many of them Greek slaves with extensive training, developed sophisticated techniques for treating the injuries common to arena combat. They understood the importance of proper wound care, developed early forms of sports medicine, and even performed complex surgeries when necessary. The famous physician Galen began his career treating gladiators, gaining experience with trauma medicine that would later make him the personal physician to emperors. The social world of the gladiator schools was complex and hierarchical. New recruits, called tyrones, occupied the bottom of the social ladder and faced the harshest treatment. Veterans who had survived multiple combats earned respect and certain privileges. The most successful might become trainers themselves, passing on their skills to the next generation of fighters. Despite their slave status, gladiators formed friendships, rivalries, and even romantic relationships within the confines of their schools. Religious and superstitious practices played important roles in gladiator life. Many adopted the worship of Nemesis, goddess of revenge and fate, or Hercules, the divine hero who embodied strength and courage. Before entering the arena, gladiators might perform ritual sacrifices or carry protective amulets. The uncertainty of their profession made them particularly susceptible to omens and supernatural beliefs. As the Roman Empire evolved, so too did attitudes toward the gladiatorial games. The rise of Christianity brought new moral perspectives that increasingly viewed the arena spectacles as barbaric and incompatible with Christian values. Church fathers like Augustine and John Chrysostom spoke out against the games, arguing that watching others die for entertainment corrupted the souls of spectators. Economic pressures also contributed to the decline of gladiatorial combat. As the empire faced increasing military challenges and financial difficulties, the enormous costs of maintaining the games became harder to justify. The exotic animals that had once filled the arena became increasingly difficult and expensive to obtain as trade routes grew less secure and provincial resources were diverted to military needs. The changing nature of Roman warfare also reduced the supply of prisoners who had traditionally provided recruits for the gladiator schools. As Rome shifted from conquest to defense, fewer captives were available for the arena, and those that were captured were often needed for military service or agricultural labor. The last recorded gladiatorial games in Rome took place in the early 5th century, though the exact date remains uncertain. By then, the great Colosseum had already begun its long decline, its elaborate machinery falling into disrepair and its crowds dwindling. The end came not with a dramatic final battle, but with the quiet cessation of an institution that had once defined Roman entertainment. The gladiators in the Colosseum that emerge from historical evidence and archaeological investigation present a picture far more nuanced than the simple tales of heroic warriors and bloodthirsty crowds that populate our modern imagination. These were real men and women caught in the machinery of an empire, making the best of circumstances largely beyond their control. Some found fame and fortune, others met early deaths, but most simply struggled to survive in a world where their lives had value primarily as entertainment. The arena was indeed a place of violence and death, but it was also a complex social institution that reflected the values, fears, and aspirations of Roman society. The spectacles that unfolded on its sands were carefully constructed theater, designed to reinforce social hierarchies while providing the masses with excitement and distraction. The relationship between performer and audience, ruler and ruled, played out in the most dramatic possible setting. In the end, the story of the gladiators and the Colosseum is a profoundly human one. It speaks to the eternal tensions between civilization and barbarism, between individual agency and social control, between the desire for entertainment and the recognition of human dignity. The men and women who fought and died in the arena were not so different from ourselves, caught in systems larger than themselves, trying to find meaning and purpose in lives that often seemed beyond their control. Their story reminds us that behind every spectacle, every entertainment, every grand historical narrative, there are individual human beings whose experiences and emotions transcended the roles that history assigned to them.